preacher pals are dwindling. We're down to 2 tonight. But we're still talking about our man David, 2 Samuel chapter 19. These aren't the fun stories of David's life. They're not even necessarily the most famous stories. Not all of David's famous stories are great, but in the last couple of chapters we've dealt with the rebellion of Absalom. And of course in chapter 18, as those stories unfold, the war is now over. Absalom's men have been defeated by David's men. Absalom is dead. And when chapter 18 ended, David was in great grief. Right? He's sorrowful for his son, wishes that things could have been different, wishes that, maybe it could have happened to him and Absalom had lived. But certainly God in his providence allowed this rebellion and allowed Absalom's life to be taken. And now, in chapter 19, it's time to start putting the pieces back together. Okay, so the rebellion is over. Absalom and his men have been defeated, and it's time to start putting the kingdom back together. Because you remember, a big group had followed after Absalom. David had some loyal to him. Absalom had many that were loyal to him. He stole the hearts of the children of Israel, remember? And so, putting it back together, tonight's message is David's return to Jerusalem. We're in chapter 19. Let's begin with verse number 1. And it was told Joab, Behold, the king weepeth and mourneth for Absalom. And the victory that day was turned into mourning unto all the people. For the people heard say that day how the king was grieved for his son. Number 1, Joab's rebuke. Joab's rebuke. David did not take joy at the victory. We remember reading that last week at verse number 33. He was greatly grieved. He sorrowed when he heard, David's first instinct, David's first questions when they came back with news was, what about the young man Absalom? Tell me what happened to Absalom. And when it's found out that Absalom was killed, that's when David shows those great expressions of grief. In chapter 19, it opens again with similar thoughts. Behold, the king weepeth and mourneth for Absalom. Because of that, so too then did the people. Said that in verse number 2, that the victory that day was turned into mourning. That's kind of sad that it worked out that way. David's men and David's loyal followers had won the day. They had fought for David. They had jeopardized their lives. They had put themselves out there fighting for their king. And this should have been a time of joy, right? That the rebellion was squashed, the rebellion was cast down. We're not talking necessarily about rejoicing at each individual death or rejoicing at the death of Absalom, but this should have been a time of celebration, right? David has prevailed. David's men have prevailed. Our king has won this great battle. When they should have been celebrating, here they mourn. Absalom's death and David's grief became the focal point, not their victory, not what God had done and giving Israel or giving David and his followers a victory there. David's grief and Absalom's death then became the focal point. Look at verse 3. It says that the people gat them by stealth that day into the city, as people being ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. They should have come back, celebrating, marching in triumph at this great victory that they had won. But the people returned, they're basically ashamed. It's like their joy has been turned to shame. It's like, people coming back with their heads down, people discouraged, people mourning and sorrowful. You would not know, looking at these men, and that they had just won this great battle. You would not know that God had just given David a great victory here. They're sorrowful. They're ashamed, like people that steal away when they flee in battle. What joy that they should have had was dampened by David's great grief. And in verse number 4, the king covered his face. And the king cried with a loud voice, "O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son." He is still in grief. David should have, as his people returned back to the city, David should have faced his people, should have congratulated them, should have looked his generals in the face, should have honored them, should have congratulated them for the victory. But when people return, they find David still sorrowful and covering his face as a sign of mourning. Well, Joab sees all this, and Joab has something to say about it. Verse 5. Joab came into the house to the king and said, "Thou hast shamed this day the faces of all thy servants, which this day have saved thy life and the lives of thy sons and of thy daughters and the lives of thy wives and the lives of thy concubines, in that thou lovest thine enemies and hatest thy friends. For thou hast declared this day that thou regardest neither princes nor servants. For this day I perceive that if Absalom had lived and we had died this day, then it had pleased thee well." That's what you call a rebuke. That is Joab telling his king, knock it off. Snap out of this wallowing in misery. And Joab obviously is not one that you would accuse of having much tact, right? And there's no way to imagine the grief that David is going through, right? That this hasn't happened to us to this degree, to this level, right? Seeing this son. But Joab comes along and is like, okay, man, enough's enough. The people sided with you when when so many had their hearts stolen and people turned against you. You have men that sided with you. You have men that fought for you. You have men that went out and won a battle for you, and you're making them feel terrible about it. Like they can't even rejoice. They can't even joy because they look at you and now they feel ashamed. They feel terrible about it. The only thing that matters to you is Absalom. He says, I get the feeling that if Absalom had lived and the rest of us had all died, you might actually be happier about that. Then it had pleased thee well. Like, what are you doing? You know, you've got a people here that love you. They love their king. They fought for their king. You don't even seem happy about it. You seem more grieved now than you were at the beginning. And these people deserve to rejoice in their victory. They do not deserve to hang their head in shame just because you're sad about Absalom. These are intense and tough words, right, to say to the king. To snap out of it. This grief that you are showing, you're harming the relationship that you have with your people, these people that love you and fought for you. You're almost making it look like it didn't matter or that it wasn't worth it just because of Absalom. That's the most important thing to you. So, verse number 7, he says, "Now therefore arise, go forth and speak comfortably unto thy servants." You better get out there and encourage your people. "For I swear by the Lord, if thou go not forth, there will not tarry one with thee this night. And that will be worse unto thee than all the evil that befell thee from thy youth until now." David, you better go out there and talk to your men. You better go out there and encourage your crew because you are this close to losing them. When everyone else turned against you, and they stayed loyal and they stayed faithful, now they're out there questioning whether it was even worth it or not. If you don't go out there to them now, you are on the brink of losing your people. And if you lose them now, you're not getting them back. If you lose these men tonight, there will not tarry one with thee this night, and that'll be worse unto thee than all the evil that befell thee from the youth till now. Like this is the breaking point, David. You have got to snap out of this. Yes, there is a sorrow there for what had happened, for losing your son Absalom. But you are on the verge of losing your people. You have to go out to them. Now, verse number 8, thankfully, the king arose and sat in the gate. Right? David's not in Jerusalem yet, right? This is the city that David had occupied while he was watching the battle while his men went to fight for him. But he went back out to the gate, right? That place that speaks of, where decisions were made, where authority was spent. And they told unto all the people, saying, Behold, the king doth sit in the gate. And all the people came before the king, for Israel had fled away, every man to his tent. David heeded the message, right? Joab, as kind, I guess, as he knew how to do it, told the king what he needed to hear. And he listened. Now, David heeded the message, and I want to say this, not necessarily because he really wanted to, right? But because he needed to. And that's sometimes what you have to do. There are some times, even in emotionalism, and listen, David is in a spout of grief here. This is a terrible grieving situation for David, okay? We're not going to say that those things aren't real. But David needed to do what he did. And sometimes what you need to do trumps what you want to do. Sometimes what you need to do is more important than what you feel like you want to do, or what would be better serving to your emotions or to even your own mental well-being. Sometimes you have to do what you're supposed to do. Sometimes you have to do what is right by people, right by the Lord. Sometimes you have to do what you need to do. And that takes a fortitude, that takes a willingness. And sometimes if you're not willing to do it, it comes and takes a guy like Joab to come and rebuke you into it. Sometimes rebuke comes by those that you might look at and say, who are you talking to, right? Joab may not be to us spiritually, emotionally, or thoughtfully the best guy for the job, but he was the guy for the job here. And he was there, and he gave David a message that he needed to hear. And David listened. When rebuke comes, sometimes it's so much easier for us to focus on who it comes from than actually maybe just to listen to the message and think, you know what, he's right. And thankfully David did that, right? Joab doesn't have any authority over David. Joab doesn't have, he's not king. But he gave David a message he needed to hear. You're going to lose your people. These people love you, and these people fought for you, and now they're starting to question whether or not they should have and whether or not it was worth it. You better go out to them because you're getting ready to lose them. And David did. And then it says there in verse number 8 that when David did so, that was what the people needed to see. It was an affirmation that the sacrifice was worth it, that David had not cowered behind a wall and would never get over his self-pity or his grief. But David would come out, he would be amongst his people, that he would lead his people again, and that David would reign in Israel again. That's what the people needed to see, that the sacrifice was worth it. And once they saw it, they're ready to herald David and stand behind him again. So that's Joab's rebuke. Number 2, David's return. Verse number 9, it says, And all the people were at strife throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, The king saved us out of the hand of our enemies, and he delivered us out of the hand of the Philistines, and now he's fled out of the land for Absalom, right? A dispute kind of arises. David survived the coup, but he doesn't yet have the kingdom restored to him, right? David survived this mess, but how's this going to shake out? Verse 10, And Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now, therefore, why speak ye not a word of bringing the king back? What do we do here? Absalom's dead. Maybe we ought to talk about bringing David back. It seems like there's this swelling of support, right? That we probably need to talk about bringing David back now. Verse 11, And the king, or King David, sent to Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, saying, Speak unto the elders of Judah, saying, Why are ye the last to bring the king back to his house? Seeing the speech of all Israel is come to the king, even to his house. Ye are my brethren, ye are my bones and my flesh. Wherefore then are ye the last to bring back the king? Once that word starts to spread from those first couple of verses there, that people are talking about bringing the king back, David's like, okay, that's our opportunity. He gets his loyal followers, Zadok and Abiathar. You go back to the men of Judah, right? Those were David's people. That's the southern region. That's where Jerusalem was, David's home, David's family. It's where he's from. It's his tribe. You go back and tell them, okay, it sounds like there's support that's gathering, right? Why are ye the last to bring the king back to his house? David asks why they haven't approached the subject yet. It seems like there's maybe a willingness in Israel, and he wants to make sure there's a willingness in Judah as well. The nation has to be united in this. Verse 13, and say ye to Amasa, art thou not of my bone and of my flesh? God do so to me, and more also, if thou be not captain of the host before me continually in the room of Joab. Now that is a gesture. Do you remember who Amasa was? Turn back to well, I wrote it down and then wrote the wrong one down. But in chapter 16 and 17, when you read about the rebellion, do you remember who Absalom put in charge of his army? Amasa. Okay, here it was, chapter 17, verse 25. 2 Samuel 17, 25. And Absalom made Amasa captain of the host instead of Joab. When Joab was loyal to David and went with him, Absalom took of his followers and he put Amasa in charge of his army. Now I want you to notice the gesture that David does in chapter 19 once it's over. David does not start a streak of revenge. I'm going to get back everybody that turned against me. I'm going to get back every man in Israel that fought against me. No, in a gesture, in a sign of reconciliation, which, listen, this is hard to do. All right, David is a very big man here for doing this. David did something that most men would not do. You know, if you survive a coup, guess what happens to the ones that tried to overthrow you? They're gone, right? They're done. David doesn't do that. In a sign of reconciliation, he's willing, according to verse number 13, take Amasa and put him in place of Joab as captain. That is a tender, reconciling action meant to bring Israel back together. That David is not going to come back to Jerusalem. David's not going to come back and immediately draw a dividing line. Okay, who was for me, who was against me? David is trying to bring back the people together. Now, whether or not you would do what David did here, you might not have. I'm not sure I would have. But it is a very humble and, again, reconciling idea that, okay, we're not two nations. We're not two different people here for David and against David. This is how we bring the people back together. Verse number 14, and he bowed the heart of all the men of Judah, even as the heart of one man, so that they sent this word unto the king, return thou and all thy servants. And listen, that is how David began to win the hearts of the people back. Do you remember how the Bible tells us that they had been stolen by Absalom? These people that thought, that Absalom had conned, and these people that Absalom had sowed discord among. And if I was judge, things would be a lot different. And I'm sorry, no one cares about your situation the way that I would. Absalom had sowed so much discord, and he had turned so many people against his father. When David sees the opportunity, he takes it to bring the people back together. Not to take revenge, not to take out vengeance, not forced, but through forgiveness, through perseverance, through unity, bringing the people back together. That is wise. That is wise of David. This is a wisdom. This is a reconciliation. Again, I say it's unseen, probably in the here and now, and certainly historically. You read about men who survive coups and what they do to those that try to overthrow them. And David doesn't do that. David tries to bring Israel back together And the people see that. And according to this verse 14, he bowed the heart of all the men of Judah, even as the heart of one man. David wins them over by these thoughts. This man that here just a few verses ago, right, a few nights ago, weeks ago, however long it takes for these events to transpire, these that were this close to turning against him because they thought, David cares more about his son than he cares about any of us. It's now evident, no, he loves Israel. He does not want to see Israel split. He does not want to see Israel divided. He sends word back to his people, and he's willing to take even Amasa and bring him back into the army. Bring those from Israel back into his fold. That's amazing. That's an amazing thought that he would do that. So now, with all of those things said, it's time to bring David back home. Verse 15, so the king returned and came to Jordan. And Judah came to Gilgal to go meet the king, to conduct the king over Jordan. And Shimei, the son of Gera, a Benjamite, which was of Bahurim, hasted and came down with his men of Judah to meet King David. And there were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him. And Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and his 20 servants with him. And they went over Jordan before the king, and there went over a ferry boat to carry over the king's household, and to do what he thought good. And Shimei the son of Gera fell down before the king as he was come over Jordan. So Judah sends this big group to go and make sure that the king can be brought back over Jordan, brought back home. They're ready to bring him back to Jerusalem. And David has returned as king of Israel. Now, thirdly, and what you deal with here for the rest of the story, rest of this passage, at least in chapter 19, are David's responses to some men that we've seen before. The rest of these stories deal with men that we have seen in the last couple of chapters. Number 3, David's responses. There's 3 of them. There's Shimei, there's Mephibosheth, and there is Barzillai. In verse 19, we were just introduced in the last passage to Shimei again. You remember who Shimei was? The guy that had once cursed David. Do you remember when David was on the run from Absalom? The guy that was throwing rocks, the guy that was throwing stones, the guy that was cursing at David. You're getting what's coming to you. You deserve this. You're nothing but a bloody man. You were a terrible king. You brought this on yourself. And he had cursed David at one point. Well, what does it say in verse 18? The Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king. And then in verse 19, he said unto the king, let not my Lord impute iniquity unto me, neither do thou remember that which thy servant did perversely the day that my lord the king went out of Jerusalem, that the king should take it to his heart. For thy servant doth know that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I come the first this day of all the house of Joseph to go down to meet my lord the king. Shimei is one of the first to greet David as he comes across the Jordan, and he comes humbly and falls before him and King, I messed up. Please don't hold that against me. I was perverse. I said things I shouldn't have said. I was in the wrong, and I recognize it. He said, verse 20, thy servant doth know that I have sinned. I was wrong. And he doesn't excuse it. And he doesn't make excuses for it. I was wrong. Please don't hold it against me. That takes humility, right? That's a humble attitude. This one who had just previously been cursing, called David basically a vile man, a bloody man. And when David returns back over that river, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please don't hold that against me. It led to action, right? True repentance does. True repentance doesn't minimize things. He confesses it. True repentance is humble. He falls down before him. And true repentance leads to action. It says there in verse 20 that I am come the first this day, of all the house of Joseph. He didn't wait. He wanted to come right away. Now, other people remembered what Shimei had done. Verse 21, but Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, answered and said, shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed? Abishai, the brother of Joab, these sons of Zeruiah, they want to cut his head off, right? You curse the king. This man needs to die. But David said, "What have I to do with you, ye sons of Zeruiah, that ye should this day be adversaries unto me? Shall there any man be put to death this day in Israel? For do not I know that I am this day king over Israel?" Therefore the king said unto Shimei, "Thou shalt not die." And the king sware unto him. David is willing to look past this, right? Abishai comes to him and says, "He cursed you. We're going to kill him." And David's like, "No." David says, Shall there any man be put to death this day in Israel?" You know, one thing Shimei had done was curse and throw stones. You know, there were actually other people that did things. There were actually people that had swords and shields in hand. There were people that were going to war that followed Absalom, and if they caught the king, they were going to kill him. David's like, I'm not, no. We are not going to be a divided people. I'm not going to take revenge against Shimei for what he said, or any men in Israel for what they did. David sees the influence that Absalom had. David knows that Absalom stole the hearts of his people, and he is not, again, I say again, he has not got revenge on his mind. David is secure in who he is. He says in verse 22, "For do not I know that I am this day king over Israel?" David is not insecure. He's not insecure in his position. He realizes that God has won the day for him. God has restored him to the throne of Israel. He is secure in that. And you know, a lot of times insecurity breeds revenge and bitterness and holding grudges. And David doesn't do that. David is secure in God's position for him and what God had done in restoring him to the throne. David doesn't feel the need to take out vengeance against everyone that had challenged him up until this point. He's willing to forgive and forget. Put it behind him for the good of Israel. He doesn't feel threatened. He doesn't feel challenged. He's secure in his position as king. And he doesn't feel the need to go cutting heads off of everyone who cursed him or challenged him along the way. Okay. It's okay to forgive, right? People have done you wrong, and Shimei did. He cursed vilely against David. But David is willing to forgive him for the good of the nation and because of the security that he has in his own self and his position. He doesn't feel the need to start, cutting heads off and taking vengeance. Okay? It's okay not to feel the need to revenge every wrong that has been done us. Sometimes for the good of people, and sometimes because we are secure in our own person, we can get past those things. That's Shimei. Now what about Mephibosheth? Now if you remember, Mephibosheth was the son of Jonathan, the crippled one that David had exalted and raised up, brought into Jerusalem, was going to reward, for kindness for Jonathan's sake. But when we last heard the name of Mephibosheth, we were talking about his servant Ziba. And when Ziba came to David and he brought gifts and he brought animals and he brought supplies and some of those things, he lied about Mephibosheth. You'll remember back, just turn a couple of chapters again, 2 Samuel 16, verse 3, the king said, "Where is thy master's son?" And Ziba said unto the king, "Behold, he abideth at Jerusalem, for he said, Today shall the house of Israel restore me the kingdom of my father." He stayed. He's not come with you. He's going to take advantage of this situation, this division between Absalom and David, and he's going to use that to his advantage. He feels that if he stays in Jerusalem, he's got a better chance of exaltation. Now, David comes across the Jordan, and let's read our text tonight, 2 Samuel 19, verse 24. "And Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king, and had neither dressed his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he came again in peace. And it came to pass, when he was come to Jerusalem to meet the king, that the king said unto him, Wherefore wentest thou not with me, Mephibosheth? Where were you? Why didn't you go with me? Why weren't you loyal to me?" And he answered, "My lord, O king, my servant deceived me, For thy servant said, I will saddle me an ass that I may ride thereon and go to the king, because thy servant is lame. And he hath slandered thy servant unto my lord the king, but my lord the king is as an angel of God. Do therefore what is good in thine eyes. King, I didn't turn against you. My servant lied. He took, what does it say? He saddled an ass. He said that I may ride thereon and go to the king, because thy servant is lame. I'm lame. What was I supposed to do? It's not like I could run out ahead of him and I couldn't beat him there. He lied to you. He slandered your servant. When Ziba said, well, he stayed in Jerusalem so that he could be exalted. King, he was lying to you. I didn't turn against you. You do what's good in your eyes. For all of my father's house were but dead men before my lord the king. Yet didst thou set thy servant among them that did eat at thine own table. What right, therefore, have I yet to cry any more unto the king? King, you've done nothing but good to me. I'm not going to question you at all in what you do next, because up to this point you've done more for me and my family than we deserved. As the descendants of Saul, and as that last remaining son of Jonathan, who we didn't deserve anything, and you elevated us. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'll respect your decision, whatever you do. But I just want to say that I didn't turn against you. I was slandered. Ziba lied to you about me. And the king said unto him, why speakest thou any more of thy matters? I have said, thou and Ziba divide the land. Now, you'll remember that when Ziba came to him in that previous chapter, David was basically ready. He said, take all that was given to the sons of Saul. Take all that was given to Mephibosheth and give it to Ziba. He was ready to reward Ziba with loyalty without ever questioning. David never investigated this scenario, right? He never went back to check if Mephibosheth had indeed betrayed him and wasn't loyal to him. And now he kind of gets caught in the middle of that, right? That Ziba had showed loyalty, maybe under false pretenses. Mephibosheth is proclaiming loyalty. What do? David says, just divide it, right? You divide it. What I promised to Mephibosheth before, and I took from him and gave to Ziba, I tell you what, split it, divide it. And Mephibosheth said unto the king, yea, let him take all, for as much as my lord the king is come again in peace unto his own house. You see what Mephibosheth cared about? I think he really was maybe slandered there. Because when David says, just divide it up amongst them, Mephibosheth is like, nah, that's not what I'm here for. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the land. He was glad to see his king returned. That is what he cared about. When we saw in that previous chapter that Ziba, he was after a reward. He was after a blessing from King David. He was after what it could get him. Mephibosheth, this one that had been exalted, this one who had been risen by David, he says, I don't care about that, right? For as much as my lord the king is come again in peace unto his own house. He rejoiced at the thought that David had returned. He was perfectly fine to turn himself over to David. And you, as the angel of God, you do what you want. You've done right by my family. If you don't give me anything else the rest of my life, you gave me more than I deserve. I'm just happy to see you back. I'm happy to see you home. Mephibosheth cared not about his own wealth or his glory. He cared about his king. That's a good motivator. That should be a good motivator for us, right? Check ourselves, do some investigation. What's our goal? What do we care about most? Ziba wanted a reward, and Mephibosheth, he wanted the glory and honor of his king, and that was what mattered most. And when his king came home, he didn't care about how the land ended up getting divided. He was glad to see his king. Barzillai. Now you'll remember back in chapter 17, Barzillai was one that when David went on the run, and when David was desperate, Barzillai had provided for him, brought him supplies, brought them food. And it says here in verse number 31, Barzillai the Gileadite came down from Rogelim and went over Jordan with the king to conduct him over Jordan. Now Barzillai was a very aged man, even 80 years old, and he had provided the king of sustenance when he lay at Mahanaim, for he was a very great man. And the king said unto Barzillai, Come thou over with me, and I will feed thee with me in Jerusalem. And Barzillai said unto the king, How long have I to live, that I should go up with the king unto Jerusalem? I am this day 80 years old. And can I discern between good and evil? Can thy servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear any more the voice of singing men and singing women? He's getting old. He's his mind is going. His hearing is going. He knows he doesn't have much time left. So when David, for what Barzillai had done, David in gratitude is going to offer him a home in Jerusalem. Come back with me. I'll elevate you to a place. I'll give you a home in Jerusalem. And Barzillai's, I'm an old man, right? I'm losing my mind. I'm losing my hearing. I can't taste anything anymore. I'm getting so old. Verse number 35, Wherefore then should thy servant be yet a burden unto my lord the king? Thy servant will go a little way over Jordan with the king. I'll be happy to accompany you, king, as far as I can. But why should the king recompense me with such a great reward? I'm not doing that to get paid. I didn't do what I did for a reward. It's amazing the differences in opinions, right? That people tried to take advantage of the situation when David was at his lowest. Now David is risen. Now that David is elevated, and David goes back to reward faithfulness and loyalty. Look at who of them are like, no, that's not what I'm looking for, right? You're finding out who really loved David, who was truly loyal to him during these times. Let thy servant, I pray thee, turn back again, that I may die in mine own city, and be buried by the grave of my father and my mother. Behold thy servant, Chimham. Let him go over with my lord the king, and do to him what shall seem good unto thee. Take this servant. Some believe, most believe actually that this is speaking of his son, right? Barzillai's son. You see that actually in 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 7, when David's getting ready to die and he's giving this charge to Solomon. He says, Show kindness unto the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, and let them be of those that eat at thy table. For so they came to me when I fled because of Absalom thy brother. David never forgot the loyalty that Barzillai had showed him and the help he gave him when he was desperately in need, right? We're talking when Absalom was at the point of pursuing him and going to kill him, he helped me. Verse 38 of our text, the king answered, Chimham shall go over with me, and I will do to him that which shall seem good unto thee. And whatsoever thou shalt require of me, that will I do for thee. And all the people went over Jordan. And when the king was come over, the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own place. Then the king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him. And all the people of Judah conducted the king, and also half the people of Israel. It's just good to kind of see some of these loose ends tied up, right? People that, we were kind of left wondering, man, whatever happened to that guy, right? Shimei, who had cursed David. One of the first to meet him when he comes over Jordan. King, I'm sorry, I messed up. I said things I shouldn't have said. Please forgive me. Please don't hold it against thy servant. And when others wanted to cut his head off, and when others were ready to take vengeance, David's no. He doesn't do that. And when he's confronted with the story here of Mephibosheth, and, Mephibosheth wasn't loyal, but you find out maybe that wasn't actually the case. Maybe David had been lied to. Mephibosheth had actually been loyal to him. And then Barzillai, who there's no question about his loyalty, who was faithful from the very beginning and had provided David with, all of these men. Whatever happened to that guy? Whatever happened with that story? David had some loyal followers. David had men that when times were tough and when Absalom had stole hearts away, he hadn't stolen all the hearts away. And now David in glory returns to Jerusalem, this big procession of Judah that carries him back across with this ferry, and they lead him to Jerusalem so that he can return as king over Israel. Now, the last 3 verses, we'll go ahead and finish this off. As cool a scene as this is, somebody's always got to rain on the parade, right? There's always somebody's always got to have an attitude. Somebody's always got to fight about something. Well, verse number 41 through verse 43 kind of says that, right? We're talking about this procession. We're talking about Judah and bringing him across the river and bringing him home to Jerusalem. What about verse 41? Behold, all the men of Israel came to the king and said unto the king, why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stolen thee away and have brought the king and his household and all David's men with him over Jordan? And all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, because the king's near of kin to us. Wherefore then be ye angry for this matter? Have we eaten it at the king's cost, or hath he given us any gift? And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, we have 10 parts in the king, and we have also more right in David than ye. Why then did ye despise us, that our advice should not be first had in bringing back our king? And the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. What's this about? Well, obviously Judah gets this big procession, right? And they bring David back and everybody's happy, everything's going great. And the men of Israel, they didn't get included, right? They hey, why didn't you include us? Nobody asked us. Nobody included us in this. We have just as much right as well, right? I mean, there's more of us than there are of you. And the men of Judah are like, he's our family. And he was going to our territory anyway. And, we did this at our own expense. This is, what's the big deal here? And Israel they got really, really mad. And you start to see the undercurrent there, right? Of though everybody's kind of happy to have David back on the throne, but to the people, there's still this kind of division of the 2 tribes down in Judah and the 10 tribes of Israel up in the north. There's kind of like a little division there. There's a friction in the way that they look at each other, the way this scenario played out. That has long-reaching effects in the future. When the kingdom is actually ultimately divided, it breaks right along these lines. And you start to see the undercurrent of that even further back. It's often something small that ends up starting a big rift or a big break. One day, and we're not going to cover it as part of this lesson because it's another 50 years in the future. The kingdom of Israel splits. Their fighting with each other started over something really, really silly, right? How come you didn't include us in David's procession, right? Bitterness, hard feelings, it often starts small like that, and then it balloons and it escalates. Nip that stuff, right? Nip that stuff while it's small. David seemed to grasp that. David's like, no, we're not cutting heads off. We're not taking revenge against people that did us wrong and went against us. David is trying to be a unifier of the people. As much as they want to bicker and fight about dumb stuff, and, David's willing to put the battle behind them, put all these stories back. He's back in Jerusalem. He's ready to be a king for Israel again and be restored to his throne. It's good to have David back, right? And it's good to tie up some loose ends of these men that had been faithful to him. All right, we're out of time. Father, we're thankful to